The hallways of Northwood High always smelled like floor wax and old paper, a scent that usually meant learning was supposed to happen. But for Elena, walking down these corridors felt more like walking a tightrope without a net. She kept her head down, clutching her worn violin case to her chest like it was a shield. It wasn't a new case. The edges were frayed, the black coating peeling off to reveal the dull beige plastic underneath. It had belonged to her aunt, and before that, someone else she didn't know. It smelled of rosin and hard work. Elena didn't mind the smell. In fact, she loved it. But to the other students streaming past her, it was just another reason to stare. As she turned the corner toward the music room, the chatter died down for a split second before rising up again, louder than before. She knew they were looking. She was a girl with the big dreams and the ratty shoes. While everyone else was talking about prom dates, college applications, and who was dating whom, Elena was thinking about vibrato, pitch, and a stage that was 300 miles away. She pushed open the heavy metal door of the practice room. It screeched on its hinges, a sound that made her wince. Inside, the room was small, barely big enough for a music stand, a chair, and her. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige that had yellowed over the years. Soundproofing foam lined the upper half of the walls, looking like egg cartons stuck to the surface. This was her sanctuary. It was the only place where the noise in her head quieted down. She set her case down gently, treating it with more care than she treated herself. She unzipped the pouch and took out her violin. It wasn't a Stradivarius. It was a factory-made instrument that had seen better days. But to Elena, it was alive. She tightened the bow, rubbing the block of rosin over the horsehair until it gripped the strings just right. She started to play. She was working on a piece that was too hard for her, a concerto that demanded speed and soul she wasn't sure she had yet. Her fingers stumbled over the fretboard, the notes coming out jagged and unsure. She stopped, took a deep breath, and tried again. Outside the thin door, she could hear the muffled sounds of the school continuing without her. Lockers slamming, shoes squeaking on the linoleum, life happening. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled. Elena froze, her bow hovering over the strings. The door flew open, and 3 girls walked in. They didn't knock. They never knocked. It was Jessica, the ringleader, flanked by her 2 friends who always seemed to be laughing at something Elena couldn't see. "Are we interrupting the genius?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was actually poison. She leaned against the metal frame of the piano that took up half the room. Elena lowered her instrument. "I have this room reserved for 20 more minutes." "Relax," Jessica said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "We're just here to listen. You know, for when you're famous." The other 2 giggled. It was a sound Elena had heard 1,000 times. It was the sound of being an outsider. "I heard you telling Mr. Henderson about your plan," one of the other girls said. She was chewing gum with an open mouth, popping a bubble every few seconds. "Carnegie Hall, right? That's the plan." Elena felt her face get hot. She hated that she had told her teacher. She had been excited after a good lesson, and the words had just slipped out. She hadn't realized that in a school like this, hope was just ammunition for bullies. "It's a goal," Elena said quietly. She started to wipe down her violin, needing to do something with her hands. "A goal." Jessica laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Elena, you can barely get a chair in the school orchestra. You think you could play in New York City?" "People do it," Elena said, her voice small but steady. She refused to look at them. "People start from nowhere and make it." "Yeah, people with talent," Jessica said, "and people with money. Have you seen the tickets for those shows? They cost more than your car." "Oh, wait, you don't have a car." The room felt incredibly small. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that she practiced 4 hours a night, that she skipped parties to learn scales, that she knew things about music they couldn't even pronounce. But she knew it wouldn't matter. To them, she was just a quiet girl in the back of the class who smelled like old wood and desperation. "Why don't you play something for us?" Jessica pushed. "Go on, play us your audition piece." The pressure in the room was heavy. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew if she played now, her hands would shake. If she made a mistake, they would laugh harder. If she played perfectly, they would just call her a tryhard or nerd. There was no winning. "I have to go," Elena said. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What?" "Come on," Jessica taunted, stepping in front of the door. "Don't be shy. Big dreamer like you, you're going to have to get used to crowds." "Let me out," Elena said. She didn't look Jessica in the eye. She looked at her shiny locket, at the collar of her expensive blouse. Jessica held her ground for a moment, enjoying the power she held. Then, with a dramatic sigh, she stepped aside. "Fine. Go save the world with your music. Just don't come crying to us when you're playing on a street corner for change." Elena shoved her violin into the case, not caring if she bumped a bridge. She zipped it up with force, her fingers trembling. She pushed past them, the smell of Jessica's perfume, something flowery and fake, stinging her nose. She walked out into the hallway, her vision blurring slightly. She didn't want to cry. Crying was what they wanted. Crying meant they won. She kept her head down and walked fast, her sneakers squeaking on the floor. She could hear them behind her, still laughing. "Did you see her face?" one of them whispered loudly. "She actually thinks she's going somewhere." Elena didn't turn around. She pushed through the double glass doors at the end of the hall and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The air outside was cool, a sharp contrast to the stuffy hallway. She walked to the edge of the sidewalk where the buses were loading. She sat on a concrete bench, putting her case between her knees. Around her, students were laughing, high-fiving, talking about their weekends. They belonged here. They fit into the puzzle of high school life perfectly. Elena felt like a piece from a different box, a jagged shape that didn't fit no matter how hard she tried to force it. She opened her case slightly, just to peek at the wood of the violin. It was scratched and worn, but it was hers. Inside the case, tucked into a small pocket, was a folded pamphlet. She pulled it out. It was a glossy brochure for Carnegie Hall. On the cover, there was a picture of the stage, bathed in golden light, with the red velvet seats stretching up into the darkness. She ran her thumb over the picture. It felt smooth and impossible. "Delusional," Jessica's voice echoed in her head. Elena looked up at the sky. It was a deep, endless blue with no clouds in sight. She took a breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air. She closed the pamphlet and tucked it back into its hiding spot. She snapped the case shut. The bus pulled up with a hiss of air brakes. Elena stood up. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. It felt heavy, but she didn't mind the weight. She knew they were wrong. She didn't know how she knew it, and she didn't know how she would prove it yet, but she felt it in her bones. She wasn't delusional. She was just beginning. She stepped onto the bus, moving past the loud noise of the other students, and found an empty seat at the back. She put the case on her lap and looked out the window as the school began to fade away in the distance. She didn't have a plan, she didn't have money, and she didn't have respect. But she had a hunger that they couldn't understand, a fire that their laughter had only made hotter. She watched the world go by, and for the first time all day, she didn't feel like hiding. She was just waiting for her turn to be heard. 5 years had passed since the days of hiding in the high school practice room, but the feeling of being an outsider hadn't really gone away. It had just changed locations. Now, instead of navigating the crowded hallways of Northwood High, she was navigating the crowded, grime-streaked sidewalks of New York City. She had a name now, at least to the people who signed the paychecks. But to everyone else, she was just a quiet girl in the oversized coat. The city was loud. It honked, it screamed, it rattled. The subway train screeched to a halt at her station, a noise that sounded like a giant metal beast dying. She stepped onto the platform, clutching her violin case tight against her chest. It was the same case from high school, just more battered. The corners were held together with duct tape that was starting to peel. She walked up the stairs and out into the cold air, merging with the flow of people rushing to their important jobs. She wasn't rushing to a corner office. She was rushing to a coffee shop on 4th Street to work the morning shift. Life in the city wasn't like the movies. It wasn't glamorous. It was mostly just math. How many hours did she need to work to pay rent? How much could she save for lessons after buying groceries? She lived in a studio apartment in Queens that was so small she could touch the stove, the fridge, and her bed without moving her feet. The walls were paper thin. She knew exactly when her neighbor woke up, what TV shows he watched, and what he liked to eat for dinner. To keep the peace, she practiced with a heavy mute on her violin. It dampened the sound, turning the rich, bright music into a dull thud. It felt like playing with a pillow over her face, but it was the only way she could play without the landlord banging on the ceiling with a broom handle. Her days were a blur of caffeine and exhaustion. She would work at the coffee shop from 6 in the morning until 2, serving people who were too busy on their phones to look her in the eye. Then she would rush home, change out of her uniform, and grab her instrument to head to auditions. Auditions were the worst part. They were held in windowless rooms in basements or on dusty stages in empty churches. She would walk in, heart pounding, and play her heart out for a panel of judges who barely looked up from their clipboards. "Thank you," they would say, not even looking at her. "We'll be in touch." They never called. One Tuesday, after a particularly brutal rejection where she had been told she was technically proficient but lacked star quality, she decided to go to a small gathering. An old friend from her hometown was visiting the city and had invited her to a party at a rented loft downtown. She almost didn't go. She was tired, and her fingers were sore from a 4-hour practice session. But she put on her one decent dress, a simple black thing she found at a thrift store, and headed out. The loft was beautiful. It had high ceilings and big windows that looked out over the city lights. There were bowls of fancy snacks and people holding glasses of wine. Laughing easily, she stood near the wall, holding a glass of water, feeling out of place. Everyone seemed to know each other. They talked about marketing, graphic design, and promotions. They looked comfortable. They looked like they belonged. Then she saw him. It was a guy she had gone to high school with. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than her rent. He was holding court in the middle of the room, telling a story that made everyone laugh. She tried to slide away into the crowd before he saw her, but it was too late. His eyes locked onto hers, and he excused himself from his group. He walked over with a wide, confident smile. "Hey, I didn't expect to see you here," he said, giving her a light hug that felt stiff. "How long has it been?" 5 years, she said, forcing a smile. "You look good. Doing well." "Great," he said, straightening his tie. "I'm working at a firm downtown now. It's intense, but the money is good. You know how it is. Stability, right?" He said the word stability like it was a golden trophy. He looked at her, waiting for her to match his energy. "That's great," she said. "I'm still playing." His smile faltered just a fraction. It was a microscopic twitch, but she saw it. "Oh, right, the violin. That's a nice hobby. Do you play in a local community group or something?" "I'm trying to build a solo career," she said. She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. She saw the look in his eyes. It was the same look Jessica had given her in the music room all those years ago. It was a mix of pity and amusement. "Wow, that's ambitious," he said. He took a sip of his drink. "You know it's a tough industry. My cousin tried acting for a while. It's brutal. You have to be incredibly lucky. Not everyone makes it." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice like he was giving her friendly advice. "Look, I don't want to be the bad guy, but you've got to be realistic. You can't chase a fantasy forever. We aren't kids anymore. Bills don't care about dreams." He laughed a little, like he was making a joke, but his eyes were serious. "You should think about getting a teaching certification. Or maybe something in admin. There's no shame in having a backup plan." The room felt suddenly very hot. The music playing in the background seemed too loud, the bass thumping in her chest. She looked at this person, this successful person who had everything figured out, and she realized he didn't see her at all. He saw a statistic. He saw someone who was going to fail. He was comfortable in his safety net. And he wanted her to be comfortable too, because her trying made him uncomfortable. "I don't want a backup plan," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. He raised his eyebrows, surprised by her firmness. "Hey, suit yourself. Just looking out for you." "I appreciate the concern," she said, "but I have to go. I have an early morning." "Okay, sure," he said, already looking past her at someone else he wanted to talk to. "Good luck with the music stuff." Maybe I'll catch you on the radio someday. He laughed as he walked away. She walked out of the party and onto the street. The cold air hit her face, shocking her system. She hailed a taxi, even though she couldn't really afford it, because she just needed to get away. She sat in the back seat, watching the lights blur through the window, and let the tears come. They were hot and angry tears. She wasn't crying because she missed him. She was crying because a small, terrified part of her agreed with him. What if he was right? What if she was just delusional? She was 23 years old, living in a box, working for tips, and getting rejected by people who didn't even know her name. The logic of his argument was solid. It was safe. It was sane. But when the taxi dropped her off in front of her building in Queens, and she walked up the dimly lit stairs, she heard her neighbor yelling at his TV. She unlocked her door and stepped into her tiny room. She looked at the violin case sitting on her bed. She walked over and opened it, though it stared back at her. She picked up the bow and tightened it. She didn't put the mute on. For once, she didn't care about the neighbor or the landlord. She needed to hear the real sound. She needed to hear it ring out clear and sharp, cutting through the silence of her doubts. She put the violin under her chin and closed her eyes. She didn't play a gentle song. She played something fast and aggressive. She played the notes she had been too scared to play at the audition. She poured all her frustration, all her anger at that party, and all her fear into the strings. The music filled the tiny room, bouncing off the walls, vibrating in her chest. For the first time all day, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. The world told her to be small, to be safe, to have a backup plan. But the music told her to be loud. She played until her arm ached and her fingers were raw. She played until the doubt was drowned out by the sound of her own fighting spirit. She wasn't sure how she would do it. She didn't know when her break would come, but she knew one thing for sure as she lowered the bow. She wasn't going to stop. Not today. Not ever. The decision didn't happen all at once. It wasn't like in the movies where a dramatic song plays and the character makes a brave face. It happened slowly, over a series of very sleepless nights and a lot of staring at her bank account app on her phone. For months, she had been trying to do things the right way. She sent emails to managers. She mailed out press kits that cost a fortune to print. She waited by the phone. But the music industry was a fortress with high walls, and she didn't have a ladder. Every time she knocked, the answer was the same. Come back when you have a following. Come back when you have a record deal. Come back when you are someone. One rainy afternoon, she was sitting in a small cafe, killing time between shifts. She was scrolling through the venue website for Carnegie Hall. It was just a habit, a form of torture she inflicted on herself to keep her hungry. She knew the big halls were for the famous, but she saw a link for rental information. She clicked on it, expecting a number that would make her eyes water. It wasn't just expensive, it was terrifying. It was a sum of money that made her stomach turn upside down. But then, a strange thought popped into her head. If she had the money, she could rent it. Anyone could rent it, provided they could pay and had the insurance. It wasn't about being chosen. It was about buying a stage. She closed the laptop quickly, like she had just seen something illegal. The idea was crazy. It was reckless. It was the kind of thing that got people evicted. But for the next few days, the idea wouldn't leave her alone. Every time she played a gig in a smoky bar or a noisy restaurant, she imagined the music floating into a vast, golden hall instead. She started doing the math. It took her weeks of scribbling on napkins and the back of receipts. She looked at her savings, the money she had been saving for a sensible life, for a security deposit on a slightly better apartment, or maybe a new car someday. She looked at her credit cards. They were empty, waiting. If she used every penny she had and maxed out her credit limit to the absolute breaking point, she could afford it. She could rent the hall for one night. She could pay the technicians. She could print the tickets. There would be no money left for food. There would be no safety net. If nobody bought a ticket, she would be in debt for years. She would be working double shifts at the coffee shop until she was old and gray just to pay off one night of music. She sat on the floor of her small room with her violin in her lap. The silence of the room felt heavy. If she did this, she was burning the bridge to safety. There was no going back. If she failed, the bullies were right. If she failed, she was just a fool with a debt. But if she didn't do it, she knew she would spend the rest of her life wondering what if. The regret of not trying felt heavier than the fear of debt. She realized that waiting for permission was a waste of time. She was going to give herself permission. The next day, she made the call. Her hand shook so much she almost dropped the phone. When the person on the other end answered, she used her most professional voice. She gave them her name. She gave them the date. She gave them her credit card number. When she hung up, the transaction was approved. She had bought the stage. Now the real work began. She had the venue, but she had no audience. She couldn't afford an advertising agency. She couldn't afford posters in the subway stations. She was just one person with a laptop and a dream. She decided to make a video. She didn't have a camera crew. She propped her phone up against a stack of books on her kitchen table. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't style her hair. She wanted it to be real. She turned on the camera and looked at the little lens. For a second, she froze. She felt silly talking to a piece of glass. But then she thought about the party, the condescending smiles, and the people who told her to have a backup plan. She took a breath. "Hi," she said to the camera. "I'm a violinist. I've been playing since I was a kid. I've been told my whole life that my dreams are too big. I was told to be realistic, to stay small, to not make a fuss." She paused, her voice trembling just a little. "But I don't want to be small. I want to play Carnegie Hall. And I'm not waiting for someone to discover me. I've rented the hall. It's going to be just me and my violin." She held up a piece of paper to the camera. It was the rental agreement. "This is real," she said. "I don't have a record label. I don't have a manager. I'm just a person who worked really hard and saved every penny to make this happen. I'm doing this to prove that it's okay to dream big, even when people laugh at you. If you've ever been told you can't do something, this concert is for you." She stopped the recording. She watched it back. It was raw. It was unpolished. It was a little embarrassing, but it was honest. She uploaded it to the internet. She wrote a caption. "I bought the stage. Now I need an audience. Come hear me play." Then she waited. The first few hours were quiet. A few likes from friends. A comment from her mom saying she was proud. Then something strange happened. The video started to move. People shared it. Strangers. The comments started coming in, not from bullies, but from other dreamers. "I was told I couldn't be a writer," one person wrote. "I'm buying a ticket to support you. I play the trumpet in a garage band." Another said, "Go get them." She stared at the screen, tears welling up in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. The internet was a noisy, messy place. But right now, it was connecting her to people who understood the hunger. But the fear didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. As the date got closer, the reality of what she had done set in. She had spent her entire life savings. The credit card bills started arriving in the mail. She looked at the numbers and felt like she couldn't breathe. What if only 10 people came? What if the video was just a flash in the pan and nobody actually bought tickets? She stopped going out. She stopped buying anything that wasn't instant noodles. She practiced until her fingers bled, literally. She had to put Band-Aids on her fingertips so she could keep going. The music became more than just notes. It became her battle cry. Every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the look on that guy's face at the party. She remembered the girls laughing in the music room. She remembered the landlord banging on the ceiling. She took the rental contract and taped it to her wall. It was a reminder of the cliff she had just jumped off. There was no ground beneath her feet anymore. The only way to survive was to fly. The weeks blurred together. She spent her days working at the coffee shop, smiling at customers while her stomach churned with anxiety. She spent her nights on her computer, answering emails from strangers, coordinating with the stagehands at the hall, and trying to figure out how to print tickets without going broke. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She was exhausted. She was broke. She was terrified. But as she clicked send on the final logistics email to the venue manager, she felt a strange sensation. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was power. She had taken the wheel. She wasn't the victim of her circumstances anymore. She was the architect of her own destiny. She was going to walk onto that stage. Not because she was lucky, not because she was pretty, and not because she knew the right people. She was going to walk onto that stage because she refused to take no for an answer. She looked around her tiny apartment one last time. It was empty of furniture, filled only with music and determination. She picked up her bow. The show was 2 weeks away. It was time to get to work. The day of the concert felt different from any other day in her life. Usually, she woke up with a sense of dread, or at best, a neutral resignation to the grind. But today, when the morning light hit her window, she felt a vibrating hum in her chest. It was terror, pure and simple, but it was sharp and electric. She didn't go to work at the coffee shop. She had called in weeks ago, saying she had a family emergency. In a way, she wasn't lying. This was a family emergency for herself. Today was the day she either validated her existence or became the city's biggest laughingstock. The venue had sent a car to pick her up and her instrument. When the black sedan pulled up to the curb in Queens, her neighbor was outside smoking a cigarette. He watched her slide into the back seat with a violin case, his eyes wide. She saw him mouth the word, "Whoa," as the door clicked shut. For the first time in 5 years, she felt like she wasn't just a girl making noise upstairs. The drive into Manhattan felt long. The city looked gray and indifferent through the window. She looked at the people on the subway platforms as the car drove over the bridges. They were just regular people going to regular jobs. Today, she felt like an astronaut on her way to the launch pad. She was leaving the regular world behind. When the car pulled up to the venue, she felt her stomach drop. It was magnificent. The stone walls were towering and imposing. The famous posters of legends lined the entranceway. She walked into the stage entrance, trying to look like she belonged there, try to walk with the confidence of a star, even though she felt like a little kid playing dress-up. Inside, the backstage area was a maze of hallways and concrete. It smelled of history and floor polish. The stage manager met her. He was a burly man with a clipboard who looked like he had seen 1,000,000 concerts. "You're the self-produced act?" he asked, looking down at his list. "That's me," she said, her voice sounding smaller than she wanted it to. "All right, we need you for sound check in 10. She walked out onto the stage. The auditorium was dark, lit only by the work lights. It was cavernous. The silence in the room was heavy, like it had weight. She walked to the center mark, where a single stool stood. She put her violin case down and opened it. The wood of the instrument looked at home in this golden room. Even if she didn't, she played a few notes. The sound was incredible. It bounced off the walls and hung in the air, rich and clear. It was the best she had ever sounded. But as she played, she looked out into the dark seats. They were empty, row after row of red velvet, waiting for bodies. "Sounds good, we're set," the sound engineer called out from the booth. She walked off the stage and into her dressing room. It was small, with a mirror and a counter. She sat there for hours as the time ticked by. This was the hardest part, the waiting. She pulled out her phone to check the ticket sales one last time. The online counter had frozen an hour ago. She stared at the number. It wasn't a sellout. It wasn't even half full. It was a respectable crowd for a beginner. But in a room this size, a respectable crowd looks like a handful of people lost in a forest. About an hour before the doors opened, there was a knock at the door. It was the venue manager again. He looked hesitant. "Listen," he said, leaning against the frame. "The house is looking a little sparse. The acoustics are great, but visually, for a video crew or just for the vibe, empty seats can kill the energy. I can call some of the students from the conservatory down the street, get them in for free to fill the back rows, fill the dark spots." He was trying to be nice. He wanted the show to look good, but her heart sank. Fill the seats with strangers who didn't care? People who were just there to fill space? It felt like cheating. It felt like admitting that she couldn't fill it on her own. She thought about the videos she posted. She thought about the people who had paid their hard-earned money to be there because they believed in her message. If she let people in for free now, it devalued what those real fans had done. "No," she said. The manager raised his eyebrows. "No, no free tickets," she said, standing up straight. "If there are empty seats, let them be empty. The people coming are coming because they want to be here. That's enough." He shrugged. Your call, but it's going to look quiet out there. He left, and she was alone again with her doubt. The silence in the room was loud. Had she made a mistake? Should she have taken the free bodies? Pride was a dangerous thing. What if she walked out there and saw just a few dozen people scattered like islands in a sea of red seats? She put on her long black dress. It was simple, elegant. She braided her hair back tight. She looked in the mirror and tried to see a musician, a professional. She tried to banish the image of the scared girl in the high school hallway. 20 minutes later, she heard it. It was a low rumble like distant thunder. She walked to the side of the stage, peeking out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. The main doors to the hall were open. There was a line, a long line. It wasn't just a few people. It was snaking around the lobby, out the glass doors, and onto the sidewalk. People were shivering in the cool air, holding tickets on their phones, chatting excitedly. She saw young people with instrument cases, old couples holding hands, tourists who had just seen the flyer, and people who looked like they had just come from their own office jobs. They were here. They were actually here. The stage manager ran past her, looking busy. We have to open the balcony. We're running out of seats on the floor. She couldn't breathe. Her knees felt weak. She grabbed the curtain for support. The sparse crowd he was worried about wasn't happening. The online counter had been wrong. The people were coming. The house lights dimmed. The chatter in the hall died down, turning into a buzz of anticipation. She heard the footsteps of the ushers directing people to their seats. She heard the rustling of programs. This was it. The stage manager gave her a thumbs up from the wings. You're on. Go get them. She took a breath, filling her lungs with the dusty, historic air of the backstage. She picked up her violin. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like an extension of her arm. She thought about the credit card bills waiting for her at home. She thought about the bullies. She thought about the long nights in the tiny room. She walked out of the darkness of the wings and into the bright, focused light of the center stage. The sight of the hall hit her all at once. It was a sea of faces, thousands of them, looking up at her. They weren't critics. They weren't the popular kids from high school. They were dreamers, just like her. She walked to the center stool. She didn't bow. She didn't smile for the cameras. She just closed her eyes for a second to find her center. She lifted the bow. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a silence of people waiting for something magical to happen. She was ready to give it to them. The silence that hung over the vast room was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was a silence of thousands of people holding their breath at the same time, standing under the bright, blinding lights. She couldn't see the faces clearly anymore. They were just a blur of shapes in the darkness, a vast ocean of humanity waiting for her to either sink or swim. She lifted the violin to her chin. Her hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear this time. It was a vibration of the energy in the room. She closed her eyes for a split second to shut out the glare, to find that quiet place inside herself where the music lived. Then she brought the bow down. The first note was crisp and sharp, cutting through the stillness like a knife. It rang out into the farthest corners of the balcony, bouncing off the gold leaf and the history that lined the walls. It was a sound that was bigger than she was, bigger than the small apartment she came from, bigger than the doubts. She didn't play a safe piece. She didn't play something pretty and gentle just to please the crowd. She played the storm. She played the anger she felt at every person who had ever told her no. She played the frustration of the long nights, the loneliness of the city, and the burning hunger to prove them wrong. Her fingers flew over the strings, dancing with a fury she had never let herself show before. The music swelled. It was aggressive and fast, then suddenly soft and pleading. It was a conversation she was having with the universe, asking why it had to be so hard, and then answering that the struggle was what made it beautiful. She wasn't just reading notes on a page. She was bleeding onto the stage. As she played, she stopped thinking about the technique. She forgot about the credit card bills, the skeptical stage manager, and the high school bullies. The only thing that existed was the vibration of the wood against her collarbone and the sound filling the enormous space. She felt like she was flying. The physics of gravity didn't apply to her in this moment. When she hit the final crescendo, she put everything she had left into it. She dug the bow into the strings, drawing out a sound that was raw and full of power. And then silence. She froze, her arms still raised, her chest heaving. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the sound hit her. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar. It started at the front and rushed toward her like a tidal wave. The entire hall was on its feet. She could see them now, silhouettes standing against the lights. They were cheering, whistling, yelling. It was deafening. She stood there, stunned. The noise washed over her, but she felt strangely peaceful. She looked out at the thousands of people who had chosen to spend their evening with her. They weren't here because a record label told them to be. They were here because they connected with her struggle. They were here for themselves, for their own dreams that they had buried away. She bowed deeply. It wasn't a bow to the audience, but a bow to the dream itself. She walked off the stage, her legs feeling like jelly, and the roar followed her into the wings. As soon as she was out of sight, the adrenaline left her body, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. A stagehand handed her a bottle of water, and she drank it greedily. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. The stage manager gave her a nod of respect, a different look from the pity he had given her an hour before. "You got 5 minutes," he said. "They want an encore." She laughed, a breathless, incredulous sound. An encore at Carnegie Hall. She sat on a wooden crate in the cluttered backstage hallway. The air was cooler here, away from the stage lights. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. The screen was lit up with notifications. She scrolled through them. There were messages from old friends, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Then she saw it, a message from the guy at the party, the one with the suit and the advice about stability. It read, "Astor saw you trending online. Incredible show. We should grab coffee when you're back in the city. Let me know if you need connections for the next venue. Asterisk." She stared at the words. Let him know if she needed connections? She felt a surge of emotion, but it wasn't anger anymore. It was pity. He still didn't get it. He thought the concert was about networking or luck. He didn't understand that she had just scaled a mountain that he was too afraid to even climb. She selected the message and hit delete. Then she blocked the number. She didn't need his connections. She didn't need his validation. She had just filled the most famous hall in the world with her own hands, her own money, and her own heart. She had done the impossible. Standing up, she adjusted her dress. She wasn't the girl who hid in the practice room anymore. She wasn't the girl who accepted the pitying looks from the successful people. She was a force of nature. "Ready?" the stage manager asked, checking his watch. She smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "Ready," she said. She walked back out into the light. The cheering started up again, louder this time. She walked to the center of the stage. She didn't play another fast piece. She played something simple and sweet, a lullaby for the girl she used to be, the girl who sat on a cold bench with a scratched-up violin case. She played for the dreamers in the audience, hoping they would hear her music and realize that their dreams weren't crazy either. She played to show them that the world will tell you to be small, to be quiet, to fit in, but the only real failure is quitting. When the final note faded into the rafters, she knew this wasn't the end of the road. The debts were still there, waiting for her. The hard work would start again tomorrow. But the fear was gone. She had faced a giant, and she had won. She bowed one last time, the red velvet curtain beginning to descend, cutting off the view of the crowd. As the heavy fabric hit the stage, the reality of the world rushed back in, the smell of the dust, the noise of the crew, the dampness of her sweat. But she stood tall in the darkness. She wasn't just a violinist anymore. She was the girl who filled Carnegie Hall. And that was a story no one could ever take away from her.